Hello, this is Malorian, this is the Orc Tactical Team, and what we're going to be talking about today is something I've been seeing more and more about in battle reports or on the forums, where people are saying like, man, I just went to this tournament, but it was 2,500 points, and they only gave us 2 hours. I could never get a game done. I could only get to like turn 4. I just couldn't make it. It's not enough time. And so this is something I was talking about probably a couple of years ago I did this, but I'm going to touch on it again just because I'm starting to see this more. And it's really just how to speed up your play. Because really when you start going to tournaments, and really just any sort of game anyway, it's really good if you can start working on this. And I think the really first thing to look at is that you got to stop blaming the tournament and start looking at yourselves. I mean, as long as they're not saying like you get 45 minutes for a 3,000 point game type thing, you should also try and look at your own things you're doing. And the very first thing you can do is look at your army list. And now this is something that I see that's very different, because if you look at 40k or at War Machine, it's very evident, and it's a very big thing that people plan when they're making their list. Orcs with a K, if you're making a 40k army that way, it's like, well, you know, you could be taking tons of these units of 30 orcs, but when you have to move all those models, it's just you won't have time to finish. And so people won't take that army to a tournament because they know how long it takes. Same thing with War Machine. You can have a lot of units in there, but again, I mean, if it's going to take so long to be doing all the movement, all the rolling, even the style, if it's like, well, I could do attrition, but that takes a lot longer and I have to get within this time period. But for some reason, when it goes over to fantasy, nobody really thinks about that. You know, they might be taking lots of units, ones that run more of an attrition type style, and so of course they run out of time, and what are you going to do, right? So that's really something you have to kind of look at your list. I know whenever I make a list, I make it very aggressive. It's supposed to get in there, it's supposed to destroy, and really by the end of turn 3 or 4, you should know who's going to win. And probably, I mean, sometimes I have my opponents give up or something on turn 4 or something just because it goes across and that's where it goes. Or my characters get dweller and there you go. But anyway, so it's really kind of an aggressive thing like that. Another way you can be changing up your list is to make it so that it, instead of having like an all-rounded army that touches on all the different areas, is make something that's going to be really focusing on two phases of the game. So maybe you have something that's going to be very strong combat and very strong magic, kind of like what I do. So what that means, when it gets to the shooting phase, there's nothing really there. Movement, very, very simple, right? Same thing if you're doing Wood Elves, right? It could be a thing where I'm really going to be big on movement and shooting, but I'm not going to be doing really any combat, and I'm not going to be doing much of magic, right? Something like that that's going to be speeding things up. The next thing you gotta be looking at is how you're actually handling yourself during the game. And I mean, one of the things I find funniest is whenever I see a guy, he's like, all right, I need a 4+. All right, I need a 4. You know what I mean, right? Where he sits there rolling and rolling and rolling and shaking the dice and then putting it out. And I mean, one of the funny things is, of course, whether you go shake, shake, roll, or shake for 2 minutes, roll, it's going to give you exactly the same probabilities for getting whatever roll, right? So, I mean, don't waste your time with that stuff. Just pick up your dice and roll. I mean, it might sound silly and petty, but really, if you're adding, 15 seconds to every roll over the course of the whole game, I mean, let's look at 2 hours, right? That's 120 minutes. If you're losing, let's say, even 15 minutes to dice rolling, well, there's a big chunk of your time gone. So all these things you have to try and reduce as much as possible. The other thing is you also have to make sure that you're focusing on what really counts, right? And not trying to dwell on things. Because if you're going in there and you're saying, you're like, oh man, I need a 4+, oh man, if I just would have cast this spell, it would have been a 3+, well, leave that kind of griping and back thinking, all this stuff, hindsight, to after the game. The same thing where sometimes you see people start discussing things with their opponent, right? Well, they say, oh man, you pulled that off. Oh, well, just to let you know, if you wouldn't have got this, see, I had this all set up here so that this was going to flank and then this was going to do this here, and so really, man, I mean, that just changes the whole game. I kind of had this all in place, but because it's one thing, there you go, you had this whole little story that just took another 5 minutes out of your game, right? The thing is that you have this finite amount of time for your tournament, and then usually you have 15 minutes to half an hour between games. Save all that talking till after. And it's something that's maybe a little bit more touchy depending on who you are, because the thing is that when you go into a tournament, you do want to be friendly. I mean, sportsmanship points aside, I mean, you're not going there to be a complete jackass, right? You're there to have fun, play some games. Of course, winning is important, but there's always the whole community thing too. So even though you want to be kind of friendly and doing all this, don't be overly friendly and overly talkative. Just get the thing done and get it moving on, right? So you can just keep on doing that and then talk about this stuff after. Another big thing you have to make sure you have set for yourself is your strategy. And that's a big thing when you're going into a game and you've built it. You probably should already have a good idea how it's supposed to work, right? All right, I got this unit that's going to be my tar pit. These two are my true real hammer units. Of course, I have these war machines in the back shooting these priority targets. And then I have these wolf riders are going to be doing whatever, right? And so going into the game, you should have this generic strategy already set up. And even that even goes to your deployment. I see people losing tons of time in deployment where they're umming and wondering where to put all this stuff. And I mean, really, you should have this stuff planned out already, right? My general has to be in the center. He's going to be in this unit. This unit and this unit has to be within his bubble. I have maybe these flank units, and really have to decide is left or right, right? Flip a coin if you can't really decide, right? Get it done. And you just, again, deployment is a spot where you can be losing lots of time, which isn't doing anything in the game. So make sure you have that going. And the same thing when then it gets to your turns. You have your entire opponent's turn to decide what you're going to do. I mean, every single time he does something, you can say, yeah, you know, that's something I already planned on, or, oh, you know, like, oh, that's different. Okay, now if he's going to do this, that means I have to do this. But you see so many people out there that are almost like they're surprised. Like, okay, now your turn. And they're like, oh, okay, well, oh man, what am I going to do? It's just like, geez, you got to be ahead of this and think about this on the other person's turn, because there's no reason to be losing this time and doing all this. And I think another way you can help control that is really, it's just practice, getting lots of games in. You get this with other sports, say like with wrestling or stuff like that, where they say you really need to have this muscle memory. And what that is you want to get to the point where your body knows exactly what it's going to do, and you don't need to think about it because it's faster and it's automatic. And even though we're talking about something now that's like a tactical tabletop war game, the same thing applies. I mean, I've played so many games now that whenever I see a situation in a game, I'm just running on autopilot. I mean, there's many games where the kind of end is like, whoa, you know, like I had to kind of think back to my decisions, and you know, I first kind of question myself, like, was that the right thing to do? And it's like, well, yes, okay, but it's just I'm on autopilot because after playing X number of years, you've seen all these situations, you've handled them poorly, you've handled them well, and you already have a good feeling. Okay, this is the right way to do it, right? I want to be sending my Savage Orc Biggins into, you know, this type of unit, not up into a big monster that's going to be crushing me type thing. So it's just those type of things there where you have to kind of really have that practice. You can just go into the game and just go. And again, I mean, with that comes the whole point where whenever you see new players have something bad happen to them, like some sort of bad roll, like you get your double one animosity and it totally screws you over, right? The person that's more new is like, wow, I can't believe that happened, right? And they can go on and rant about it, and it can throw them off, and they'll spend time thinking about it. Whereas a person that's been playing lots and lots of games, they've been hit with double ones, you know, maybe dozens, maybe even 100. I mean, just it depends how long you've been playing, right? But of course, when it gets, it's like, oh, well, it came up again. All right, oh, whatever, you can't change it. All right, so that means I have to do this instead. And then just move on, right? It just goes on to reflexes at that point. Now, I'd say that the only two reasons why you should be having a slow game that's not because of you is because your opponent, because either he's playing slow because A, he's a new player, or B, because he's slow playing you on purpose. Now, when it comes to the slow player because he's new, you know, that can be really frustrating depending on what the situation is, right? Like if you're a really competitive person, I mean, usually if you're against somebody new, you're saying, I'm going to win this game. However, it could be a thing where if you want to be going for first place, you have to win by a massacre, or you have to win by a massacre and get these objectives. And I need to get at least to turn 5 to get to these objectives, right? So it's really important we go fast. Well, there's two ways to really handle this. One is kind of the jerk way where you're kind of bullying your opponent, like, come on, let's go. Let's just do this. Like, come on, hurry. I want to get this objective. Come on, go. And really, that's going to get you looking like a jerk, and you're not going to have a fun time. Probably the best thing to do is kind of approach it from the mentor type of side, saying, okay, I've been playing for a long time. If you don't mind, I'll help you out with some of the math and some of these things, and that'll help things really go along. So like right there where it's the weapon skill 2 versus weapon skill 4, where they might be trying to remember if it's supposed to be going to a 5+ or not, and the director like, come on, don't you know what this is, blah blah. You're like, oh, that's a 4+, and then after you're going to need a 3+ to wound, and that's going to leave me with a 6+ armor. And it really keeps things rolling faster. Of course, with the combat res, you can already be doing the math for them, so that as soon as the combat's done, all right, you lost by 2, you got to roll your dice, you're going to need to get a 5 or better, right? Something like that, where you're helping it along, and you're more doing it in a way of like, as a tutor, as a teacher, rather than someone that's going to be really a jerk. And of course, it's not going to help you for everything. I mean, if there's still a person that likes to really think things through or whatever, you can try giving them suggestions like, okay, so the way this is right here, obviously I'm about to attack here, but if you attack me, I'm also going to be able to flank, so you probably want to be a little bit more defensive. And then they'll go like, oh, okay, and they'll do the right thing. I mean, of course, you're kind of helping them, and in a way, it could be that means that you're not going to be scoring as big as a win as you could be. I mean, like if you would have walked into this mistake, you're just going to crush them and get a massacre. But then again, if you want to keep on running smoothly the whole time, he's going to start trusting you. You're going to be able to keep on things rolling. And where something like I just said, where sometimes it's not just about winning, sometimes you have to get objectives where you're getting across the board. So even though you massacred him, well, now you ran out of time, you can't get a unit into his deployment zone. You didn't get the secondary objective, and now you're out of the runnings for first place. So that's that whole thing there. The next thing is a slow player that's slow playing because he either wants to keep it to a draw, or he's already ahead in points, like he took a shooty army and then he slow plays so that you can't get into combat, or he notices that he's losing and he wants to lose by like a minor or a draw and doesn't want to turn into a massacre type thing, right? And what I find there, I mean, of course, that's going to be even more frustrating because this guy is doing it on purpose. And, not only are you trying to speed things up so you can actually get the whole game done in time, but you also want to speed up because obviously he's slow playing because you're about to get a better result. And the biggest problem here is that you have no physical way of forcing this to happen. I mean, you could call over the tournament organizer, you could have him watching, but really, if you try and think of it through the eyes of a tournament organizer, what can he really do, right? It's not like it's something like with War Machine where you have timed turns, like, oh, your turn's over, next person, right? He can kind of give them warnings and something like that and say that he'll maybe award a win to the other player, but then you have this whole thing where like, oh, damn it, I need to get a massacre or something, right? And I would have scored that if I could have just gone. So there's really out of those hands. So what I really find is probably the easiest thing to do is be vocal about it, because some of these people, they have no problem being a jerk and slow playing, but at the same time, they don't like being that shown off to everybody else. So if you kind of love, it's like, oh, great, there you go, slow playing. Hey, that's what we're going to be doing now, is slow playing. And now, whereas, I mean, before he was probably exactly that's what he's wanting. Now he's probably kind of looking around, people are sneering at him and all that stuff, and it's just, then he may be trying to be speeding things up, and whereas he might be trying to spend 10 minutes trying to think out of a movement phase, maybe he'll be like more pushing it and he can actually get done within a minute or something or two. But that's really all you can do, and really that's the frustrating one, where all you can try and do is go as fast as you can yourself, try and make sure you don't make any mistakes while you're doing that, but that's the very tough one. But overall, like I said, try and focus on the things that you can change. Doing something like a 2,500 point game in 2 hours should be no problem. Just make sure that your army is something that's designed to actually win at a good rate, and it's not going to be a slow attrition. Otherwise, obviously, you're setting yourself up for failure. Try and help yourself out by knowing your own rules, so you're not having to look things up, by having it so your army focuses on different phases, so that's even faster, and then just making sure that you have your plan worked out before you even get to the table, or before it gets to your turn, you're planning it out while your opponent's doing his turn. So there you go, that's how you play faster, and hopefully we can all start finishing some games on time. Okay, thanks, bye.